to jump on and learn a little bit more about Gen Z with us here today. Just to go over a couple of our house rules as usual during our webinars. We encourage you to keep your cameras on, to mute your mics until we pause to ask for questions. Always feel like you can raise your hand and ask questions inside of the chat during the webinar itself. And without further ado, let's introduce who's going to be on the call with us today. So we got Nick Rogacki, our creative director, who's very passionate about going through this topic today. We've been throwing a lot of numbers back and forth over this one, so we're really excited to jump in. And we have, of course, our managing director, Peter Anania, with us today, controlling the chat. And jumping in here and there whenever we have our questions. And of course, many of you know me, Dustin Bailey, our account executive and fellow partner here at Anania Bailey. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about Gen Z. We're looking at reaching and recruiting the digital generation, the social media generation, and we're thinking a lot about how all of our marketing is going to start focusing on this particular audience and how we need to work through it. We're going to talk a little bit about the problems we've had identifying trying to reach this audience. We're going to talk, we're going to get right down to brass tacks and talk about strategies, some that you might know, some you might have heard of, some that you might have experienced yourself, and then a couple of the more difficult things you have to put time and investment into to make sure you're going to be in a good spot to reach that audience. And then we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about what your current marketing plan is and how it needs to be adjusted to reach this audience. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Nick and we can talk a little bit more about Gen Z.
All right, thanks a lot, Dustin, and thanks for everybody for joining. I think it's a really interesting topic to have because among kind of the conversations that we have with clients, peers, other people within the kind of the marketing and creative field, there's a certain amount of anxiety, I think, and around Gen Z, and I think some of that you can chalk up to just there's a new young generation and we don't understand them, which is a disease that I feel like happens with every young generation. And I think that part of that has to do with some real general differences that this generation has as a result of kind of technology, timing, kind of where society's been moving. That really makes them legitimately a little bit different, specifically when we're thinking about marketing, communication, and creative. I just want to give you a quick anatomy of kind of what we're talking about generally with Gen Z. I emphasize generally because when you're talking about a generation, you paint with a broad brush. What I really want to focus on a little bit is just some facts, just some truisms about this generation and stats here. First off, when we say Gen Z, we're talking about the generation born generally between 97 and 2009. For those of you who aren't good at math, that means they're between 13 and 25 years old. Another way of saying that is they've been in the workforce for 7 years already. So this is a generation that isn't a budding issue that we're first trying to wrestle with, but rather one that I think as a community, we've been trying to get to know and understand more thoroughly for almost a decade now. There's some things that really stand out for this generation. I've got some stats up here that you can check out. I'm not going to read them all now. But I would say there are kind of 4 things that stand out, at least to me, about this generation. The first one is they're really passionate disruptors. We're talking about a generation that's lived through a lot of radical change in a very short amount of time. They're all post 9/11. This is a generation that's been defined by BP oil spills, by climate change, by social movements like Black Lives Matter, by school shootings. I mean, this is a generation that has really been dealing with a lot of radical change in equality, climates, and politics. That makes them not the first generation with ambitions to change the world, but as digital natives, they are really able to leverage technology to kind of close the gap between power and brands and politicians in a way that we really haven't seen in a long time. You could probably say that to some degree, ironically, the baby boomer generation was probably the last one that was similarly moved to change the world at this kind of period in their generational growth. And they were similarly using a lot of new approaches, nonviolent civil resistance then, social media now. It is an interesting dichotomy, though. I promise all this is relevant as we talk about marketing, because this is a generation for whom 80% believe that they have the power to change their country, and 55% believe they will never have enough money to support a family. There's this really kind of interesting combination in this generation between the idea, the feeling of being empowered, and also kind of fatalistically sort of in a rough place, maybe potentially screwed. They're globally connected too. 77% of Gen Z have online friends that they've never met before. The oldest member of Gen Z was a child when the iPhone was first launched. So this is also a generation that cannot remember a time without the immediacy and mobility of the internet. That changes how they deal with marketing. It changes how they interact with content, with their expectations around creative. It's something that's really present in this generation. They're also shapeshifters, and I mean that in a variety of different ways. There's a lot of interesting sort of dichotomies. 30% of Gen Z say they like to stand out. 40% say they value being accepted by others. That's not an easy circle to square. You've got really contrasting attitudes around kind of their shifting identities that make it hard to target them. 75% of this community says that their race, gender, or sexuality cannot be categorized. For the marketers here, that makes it really hard to do highly targeted advertising when you don't know who you're targeting, because they don't necessarily have an identity to be targeted or see themselves in those targeted spaces. 25% of Gen Z expect that their gender identity is going to change throughout their lifetime. I think for a lot of people of older generations, that wasn't even a multiple choice option in their mind. And 1 in 4 of this generation sees this as something that's fluid. And I think that that's something that sort of helps us to understand why I think historically we've seen a bit of a disconnect between marketing and comms coming from some shops trying to communicate with this community. And the last thing that's really important here, and you're going to see this as a same theme throughout the conversation we have today, is this is a very purposeful generation. 57% of this generation is going to choose to buy products or engage in content that makes them feel fulfilled. And 70% will buy products that mention mental health advocacy or climate awareness. The idea that consumerism goes hand in hand with some sense of responsibility or self-actualization is really, really big with the Gen Z community. I think that's something that we maybe already notionally understand. It might be a truism that feels a little like kind of a dull old take when we talk about Gen Z, but it doesn't make it any less significant. And it's a foundational element that you need to understand around this generation as we talk about strategies to engage them. Dustin, do you want to talk a little bit about the reasons why?
Yeah. So, we always like trying to stage this a little bit and thinking about like what are the challenges. And one of the challenges that we constantly have been thinking about whenever we talk about this particular audience, right, is that you need to reach this audience. You don't really have a choice. It's not an audience you could ignore for a long time. As some of the stats we kind of threw out there, they are already 7 years into the workforce. Anybody who has been trying to recruit in the last couple of years understand that this is an audience that they need to reach, and this is an audience they need to speak to. So we're seeing it from all different types of angles, from products and services to recruitment to brand awareness. Like there is this audience needs to be reached in a variety of ways, because they are out and productive within the society already. Like this is an audience you can kind of put off and say, well, we're only focusing on this X year to there. Like it's they're older than I think we give them credit for already, and they're here and they're already making decisions on where their careers are starting, on where they're buying their products, and starting those loyalty kind of attachments that they're going to have throughout their buying history, which from what we're seeing with this generation, I'm sure Nick can also agree, like their loyalty to a certain brand will stick for years so far.
So there's a couple of things that I think kind of add up to the challenges we're trying to address. And what we want to do is we're going to talk about challenges, and we're going to talk about kind of different strategies for addressing these. The big three here is authenticity. Adopting authentic marketing is going to make you kind of a strong ally with Gen Z as either from the recruitment side or from the either from recruitment or from sales. But in order to really do that, you need to overcome the dilemma of, I think, how to maintain your authenticity and transparency. It can sometimes be difficult to really figure out how we want to communicate authentically about who our brand is, what we represent, maybe what our owner represents, what our products are supposed to be. And that can feel like kind of antithetical to a lot of what we talk about in marketing, which is trying to highlight specific things for specific audiences, or to try to target specific groups with specific messaging. That over targeting can be really problematic for this group. They've been digital natives for a long time. They recognize a kind of marketing BS. They know when they're being targeted. They know when they're being talked down to. So this is a generation that for whom marketing has become very status quo, and they can sense that when you're not being authentic. And so authenticity, which is something that very few brands I think do well, is something that all brands need to do well in order to really engage with this community. And in order to do that, you need to find common ground. Shared values are huge here. And it doesn't mean that you need to have the same shared values that you perceive this generation to have. And as a reminder, this is a broad brush. I don't want to suggest that this generation all believes in X or Y. But when we're talking about something, whether it's climate change, racial injustice, these are all mainstream elements of their daily lives. And there should be places where any brand can find shared values. And that doesn't mean to be the shared value in gun control when a school shooting happens, but the shared agreement that human suffering is tragic and horrible, right? Or the sense that we shouldn't have to live lives in fear. Whatever through line you can find there that sidesteps the politics, but finds those shared values is something we want to consider. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you don't need to comment on everything that happens and everything that is kind of relevant or in the current conversation nationally is something that you need to address from a brand point of view. But understanding where your shared values are and how you can sort of leverage that to have an authentic conversation is really going to be central to a lot of what we talk about here. But we've been talking a lot about kind of this intro, who this generation is, what some of these challenges are. I want to take a quick pause and kind of let us sort of unpack some of this, talk a little bit about it first, before we jump into talking about kind of strategies to address that, if that makes sense. Dustin, am I going rogue or does that feel good?
No, it feels good.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I put in chat, like Nick said, we want this to be a two-way street. We don't want it to be just hearing from us the whole time. So if you have thoughts of any challenge you're facing targeting this demographic, use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and I'll ask to unmute you. Adam, it looks like you're looking to talk here. But while we're waiting on that, Dustin and Nick, I just wanted to bring up in the survey we did leading up to this webinar, something that kept coming up was budget being a challenge, not knowing how much of a budget to allocate towards this demographic. I think it came up on almost every single submission that we got, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think Dustin can speak to a little more, and maybe we kind of kick that can down the road a little bit for when we're talking about sort of how you allocate your strategies. I think that as we get deeper into this, the message around budget is probably more around making some drastic choices around what platforms you want to spend on that maybe you haven't been spending on, and maybe even considering wholly abandoning other platforms, because not only is Gen Z, I think, not using a lot of the marketing platforms that we expect that has become sort of commonplace, but they're also an early indicator of where everyone else is going to. You're probably going to see the same sort of communication trends that Gen Z is embracing now as a trailing indicator in kind of the millennial and Gen X communities that you're seeing, that you're gonna kind of see over the next couple of years.
Yeah,
but
and I recall part of that question too, Peter, where it was kind of asking a little bit more of like, do we budget by the audience, which is, since we're talking a lot about like the audience itself by Gen Z, or do we do it by platform? And I'll go over this a little bit more later on too, but like to sort of give a short answer to that, yeah, like when we're looking at this, I don't think it's good to separate your budgets based on your audiences. It's better to do it by your platform because you're going to need to have that flexibility later on. And that's a huge challenge that I think a lot of people are facing is like, well, do we have to have a completely different set for this audience? No, it's going to be, you need to find a way to integrate Gen Z into everything instead of making it fully separate. But I think, when we talk a little bit about creative, we talk a little bit more about how you build your plan. Those kind of get fine tuned when we dive into it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I say we keep going, and just one last time, we do want people to come on. We have 50 people here. We had 100 people sign up. Oh, we have someone. We have a raised hand here, so hold on. Mike, I'm gonna bring you on. I'm gonna ask to unmute you.
Yeah, thanks very much. This is terrific so far. Can you make a little bit of a distinguishing a comment between the channels for marketing and the channels for recruiting? And because I think there's a little bit of a distinction there, and so far you've kind of lumped those together. And do you see a differentiation there between with respect to Gen Z and their appetite for certain channels and their job search preferences versus consumption from a marketing standpoint?
So we talk about this a little bit more. Maybe I'll chat about this now and kind of skip over it when we get to it in the presentation a bit. I think speaking again, everything's very broad here, and I really want to underscore that, especially because we've got a fair number of people from this generation on this call, and the last thing I want to do is tell them who they are. But I think that when we're talking about recruitment, it has the platforms that this generation is on are true, I think, both for recruitment and for sales, to be honest. You're not going to see a lot of, at least at this stage in this generation, you're not going to see them on LinkedIn a lot. You're seeing them. We're going to talk about browsing behavior in a little bit. You're gonna see that when it comes to recruitment, this generation basically behaves very similar to the way that you might behave when you're trying to buy that next pair of headphones, right? You see that you have a need for something. In this case, it would be a job. Might be headphones. You take a look at what's available based on the websites that you see your peers using. And then when you find something that you think is interesting, you do a lot of research around that thing, whether it's Glassdoor to find reviews of the recruitment, or whether it's watching other reviews of those headphones that they might be interested in buying. And I think something that's really important to bring up here is in both those cases, you're looking for more information, not less. So when you're talking about, do I want to buy these? You're asking not just how's the sound quality, how long will they last, but you're asking how much do they cost and can I get a discount on them? That pragmatic approach and pragmatism is kind of a through line for, I think, almost everyone within this generation. That kind of pragmatism is true for recruitment as well. You need to be able to say, these are the benefits. This is the actual salary range. You can't really get away with recruitment here without talking about those elements in a bigger way. Again, just kind of spoil what we're going to talk about with this a little bit more. You need to be able to have, you need to be able to speak a little bit about the values that you have as a company too when you're doing that, right? So you need to be able to say, we're an equal opportunity employer, have a diversity statement, telegraphing the values that these headphones are made entirely of recycled plastic is the same thing that you need to be able to do when you're trying to do recruitment. You need to be able to speak to kind of what sort of values you have as an organization, both to them and broadly. So I would say there's a lot of real parallels here. And I think from a platform perspective, it's varies wildly by region and wildly by age. This is also a generation that they're going to all be on LinkedIn, whether they like it or not, in probably 7 or 8 years, right? But this is a generation that's still kind of working into that space. They're, starting their careers, they're entrepreneurial, but they're not at that middle management level. Maybe their networking skill sets haven't expanded a lot. In many cases, that's the case because of COVID, right? So those platforms I think are going to evolve and change. I'm sorry, I gave you the longest possible answer, Mike, but I promise I cut down on some of the presentation in the future.
Yeah, but I also, just to give a little piggyback, I think it's an important distinction, and we've had other webinars about this that we can also share, Mike, that, you know, I wouldn't ever put recruitment and recruitment marketing and marketing for sales and products and services all that far off from each other, especially now when we're really looking at recruitment. You know, you got to treat these recruitments like their customers. So we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years, especially with the huge spike in need for employment. So they're not too far off enough that they should deserve their own distinctions. More of the messaging and call to action, and a lot less about the tactics of actually getting in front of them.
And one more thing that I think speaks to what you're bringing up, Mike, but also what I'm seeing a little bit in the chat with Ann and Katie, is that a lot of what you're doing isn't both for recruitment, but also for, you know, kind of product sales here, is you're not trying to sell the product. You're often trying to sell the concept itself, the actual value here. 80% of this generation is willing to save up for up to 9 months before they make a purchase. And that's not a car purchase, that's any kind of purchase. There's a lot of pragmatism here. This is a generation that I think has learned a lot of lessons. Looking at the millennial generation in front of them, who came in with a lot of the same sort of values and a lot of that change the world sort of attitude and energy, and then kind of ran into walls of, like we're talking about in the chain here, student debt, ran into walls around home ownership. I mean, the millennial generation, by almost any metric, has been stunted based on where you would expect that generation to be, which is, I think, really jarring given the "you can be anything you want to be" message that generation got. And I think that as a result, the lesson that Gen Z has learned watching that older generation is these things don't necessarily pay off. I don't believe that I've got a safety net. I don't believe that the world will provide. Like there's this sense that you're kind of in it alone. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing this being a generation that engages heavily in social movements, but similarly why you see this as a generation that isn't bought in on the idea that, in this case, that what we're talking about, that college is a good investment. Like you say, it's not about which college or university to go to, it's whether I should even go there in the first place. And I think that when you're talking about something like recruitment, for instance, it's not, do I want this job? It's, am I going to have this job for more than 6 months? How long do you tend to keep people here? Like, do you have a track record of people being happy? Will I get certifications here? Are you investing in me? Or are you just sort of taking advantage of my tuition in college or of my work hours at the office? It's a big reason why you see Gen Z want to work a 40-hour week and not give into kind of that hustle culture of 50, 60-hour weeks that I think the millennial generation, and to a lesser degree, Gen X, have really like embraced wholeheartedly. So.
Yeah, indeed. So to get us back on track, because I know we've gone through quite a few things, but no, it's good. These are the kind of conversations we want to be able to have. But I know we want to at least get through some of the materials that we have here, because there are some nuggets and there are some things we should definitely cover, so everybody's on that nice and even playing field as we kind of get through this. So, you know, one of the things I want to think about when we're thinking about the strategies and how, you know, how to sort of tackle this very big challenge ahead of us, right? Is like, let's think about it, you know, essentially as the basics, you know, getting caught up, thinking about sort of the intermediate things that we've kind of gone over with some of our experiences, some of the things that we've learned, and then, you know, some of the heavy hitters, you know, some of the things to really get things moving and to really think about, you know, the time and money investment that you might need to make to be able to put yourself in a good position to be able to reach this audience. So there are a couple of different things that we want to make sure that we cover. And when we say basic, you know, we like to consider it foundational, right? Like these are the things that you've probably heard. There's similarities to millennials, but like we need to make sure that, like, when you're thinking about all of these different tactics that are going to be in front of you, and with the tools that, you know, we're going to sort of throw out here and there, that you have the foundation to be able to start a marketing plan that can start reaching this audience. So let's talk about catching up. And there we go. Nope. There we go. That's right. So, you know, one of the first things that, you know, seems pretty obvious to everybody is that when we're talking about Gen Z, you know, your media mix is, likely wrong, right? We need to think about this entire generation and what's ineffective. The ineffective kind of things that are showing up, is it's extremely limited in print. You're not going to see a lot of this generation having physical printed, newspapers, magazines, etc. Very limited in radio, very limited in TV and cable. Just as an example, they only, this generation only watches 51 seconds per day, which is the lowest generation ever, which is roughly only 5 hours a year of actual broadcast and cable television. So that's a jarring statistic to think about. How are you going to actually get in front of people? This, which is why, when we're taking a look at this, right, it seems kind of basic, but you got to be mobile first. Everything that you are considering for Gen Z has to be, right in their hand. 95% of Gen Z own smartphones. If you're not aiming at them mobile first, you're doing yourself a discredit for, you're taking your budget and you're spending it on something that is going to be least effective. You want to get comfortable with video. Obviously, not only is it smartphone first, but, video is one of the most impactful pieces of content still. In particular with this audience too, all data points really showed that they have an appetite for short form video content. So we're talking about 61% prefer short videos under a minute long, which I know, Nick, you come from the video realm. That's, seems about right. Oh, you're muted. Oh, can't get back on.
There we go. Peter
There we
unmuted
go.
me. He set me on the side. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I feel really strongly about this, guys. If you're not using short form video now, you got to, because everybody's going to be required to use it in the next couple of years. Social media platforms, we tend to see it's a cycle. Facebook is cool on college campuses. Facebook opens to everybody. Now only people's parents are on Facebook. Everybody's migrated away from Facebook. That's an oversimplification, but that is to say that that's broadly the cycle that a lot of these social media platforms tend to move on. And we're seeing right now that, for a while, brands weren't on Instagram in any meaningful way. And now Instagram is replete with brands. And TikTok is one of those places where you're seeing a lot of brands say, I don't know if I'm cool enough to be on TikTok. I don't know if I want to do any coordinated dances, I think that's a misread. I think that TikTok is a good representation of the fact that short form video is the king of short multimedia content. It always performs better. It performs better on every platform you put it on compared to certainly text and 100% images. Short form video is the way. But TikTok is probably not the right platform for many, if not most, brands right now. It will undoubtedly be a platform that everybody's on in a couple of years. And right now, Instagram gives you the opportunity to use stories and reels to start to use short form video and experiment with it on a platform that many, if not all of you, are engaging with a little bit as a brand. Now is the time to put the training wheels on, start to figure out what your video workflow looks like, how you're able to produce short, easy, organic feeling content on Instagram using Reels, because you're going to have to use that on TikTok or whatever non-Chinese platform takes over TikTok if the government goes in that direction. One way or another, short form video is undeniably the future. It performs better than everything else. If you don't know how to do it, you should learn. If you think you know how to do it, you should do more of it, and you should really prepare for that transition.
Yeah. And just as it's been with, prior, content, a one-way street is not going to be able to work. You need to start figuring out ways to make your content engaging. So thinking about how you are connecting with people, starting conversations, using polls, contests, questions, live interactions, finding ways to be able to continue to engage with this audience is just as important as it was with the millennial generation. That part hasn't lost any of its luster. It's still something that's really important moving forward.
Yeah. Peter, going wild on the tech. So the next thing that we want to talk about is kind of that next level, right? We just kind of talked about sort of the catching up, basic things you need to do to be able to tread water here. I want to talk about some intermediate approaches. The first one is you need to stay informed and stay relevant. And I referenced this a little earlier when we were kind of talking about the anatomy of Gen Z. But basically this comes down to, you don't need to take a stand on things that are happening, but you need to be aware of global events and attitudes and be able to adapt to short-term sentiments. Don't feel compelled to address everything that's happening or everything that's in the current lexicon. Don't be wheat thins when Black Lives Matter happened, is a good example. Black Lives Matter movement happened. It felt like a lot of brands felt pressure to be involved or make a statement. And wheat thins of all companies decided that they were going to go hard in the paint and be really pro Black Lives Matter. Even people who were pro Black Lives Matter thought that was a very weird choice for wheat thins. That brand didn't seem to belong there. You don't have to comment or be involved in something that because there's a global event or movement happening. But you want to be aware of what kind of content you're putting out there and read the room a little bit and be able to decide to maybe take down some retargeting ads that you have, or reconsider an audio podcast that you might have up that might not, that might temporarily or for the kind of the long term not age well or not look well in the context of an event that's occurring, right? This lines up a little bit with values, which we'll talk about in depth more, but there are also other ways that you can kind of leverage or use global events to talk about something that really does matter. I'm thinking a little bit of if you're a construction company and safety and security is paramount to the things that you're building and the people that you employ, and you want to, this is a really important thing for you. The Titanic example that we've been watching, over the last week, that might be an opportunity where you could, as a brand, jump in and say, safety is first. You can't cut corners. When lives matter, that's just so incredibly inappropriate. We're so sorry to see this thing happening. And we hope that more companies take notice of this. Like, you can make a comment there and reinforce a brand value without taking what might be a political stand on something, right? I really want to emphasize this because I think a lot of brands misunderstand this. You don't need to be political to stay relevant and authentic with this community of people. Okay, you need to be authentic and understand what your values are. The second thing is finding the right social fit. This is a little bit easier to explain, but there's a lot of different platforms you can be on. If you think about it less as platforms and more about it as communities that you want to engage, that's probably a better way to think about this right now. Don't think about it in terms of I wouldn't be on TikTok because it's trendy, and I do need to be on Instagram because everybody else is. You should think about it in terms of where are there communities that I want to engage with. And that might lead you down some interesting paths. You might find yourself trying to communicate with some of the older Gen Z as they're starting to get onto LinkedIn. Maybe you're looking for a particular part of this community that's more advanced in their careers or more entrepreneurial. Discord might be a place that you want to be. Maybe not as a brand, but you might want to elevate the platform of a founder or a thought leader at the company. Being in specific communities there makes a lot of sense. So you should think about what the right social fit is for you and think a little bit more kind of broadly around what platforms make sense. Speaking purely about social there. And the last one is that content really is still king. I mean, we all need to work harder than we ever have when it comes to making advertising appeal. That means if you can't be clever, you need to be funny. You can't be thoughtful, you need to find an emotional connection, right? You can't be topical, you need to feel relevant. Standing out for Gen Z is basically the same stakes as standing out for any other generation. You just have to do it better. You have to be funnier, you have to stand out a little bit more. And so that really just demands a higher quality of creative, frankly, and a willingness to move away from the status quo and try to stand out, which is something we talked about in a previous webinar. And then to speak a little bit more about some advanced stuff, then we'll take a breather again, because I know that we're like auctioneers here. But when we're talking about some of the advanced stuff, this is stuff that I think if you feel like you've got these foundational elements that we've been talking about, this is how you can move from keeping up to I think really making a difference here. You need to map what your values are. We talk a lot about authenticity. I think if somebody's playing an authentic drinking game out there, they probably turned off their video at this point. Authenticity is critical, and you can't be authentic unless you know who you are and what you represent, both from your employer's perspective, from what your brand is perceived as, and from frankly what your own tolerance is. You need to map those values to figure out what your brand voice is, so that you can quickly respond to changing dynamics, that you can kind of intuitively get your advertising, your social platforms, your conversation, even in company, as well as, inside as well as outside of the company, dialed in and accurate. Because if we're talking about recruitment, for instance, when somebody comes to your company, they're expecting that the company that they've seen advertise and talk about their work or talk about their product has the same values that they've found themselves working for, right? You can't be, you can't kind of pull the rug out from under this generation, or really any generation, when it comes to that sort of stuff. And so mapping your values is something it's an exercise that you need to take institutionally. It probably takes a month or so to do it in a medium-sized company for Maine. But this will allow you to really get a better sense of who you are, what your values are, and allow you to be genuinely authentic. We talked a little bit about browsing behavior when Mike rapidly threw me off course. But browsing behavior is just that this is a generation that takes more time to make purchases, make choices, apply places. This is super true of major life events like college, which we're talking about here. It's true of first jobs. It's true of career changes. And it's not because this is a generation that fears change. In fact, 60% of Gen Z say that they'd be comfortable changing their careers. That might be a little indicative of them still being relatively young, but it's not a fear of change. It's the pragmatism of doing the research. So when you're trying to address this Gen Z sort of browsing behavior, it really is that you need to build an experience. You can't just build a network of social platforms you're on, right? You need to make sure that your storefront, your website, has the same look, feel, and energy as your social platforms, that the kind of reviews that you're getting, the kind of content that you're putting out feels consistent across the board. Because when somebody's looking to buy a product or to apply for a job, they're not just going to look on your website or see those 5-star reviews that they have. They're not going to see those kind of carefully guarded Google or Yelp reviews that people are constantly trying to get bad reviews pulled down on. This is a generation that knows that the game is rigged. So what they're doing is they're going to reach out to former employers. They're going to check to see, live feeds or videos that people have made of reviews of your products that maybe are in some of the smaller corners of the web. They're going to watch 5 unboxing videos instead of 1, because they're not going to take one person's opinion for it. You need, in order to insulate yourself or prepare yourself for that kind of browsing behavior, you need to make sure that not only that you believe in the product you're putting out, but that you're building an experience, an omni-channel experience that is coherent and consistent, so that, frankly, this generation doesn't smell bullshit and bail, is they will dart away from your brand. And once they leave, it's very hard to get them back. Once they've made a decision that you aren't authentic, or that your values aren't consistent, you kind of lose. The last point, and I do a lot of talking, guys, so I appreciate y'all being here for this. The last point is collaborative marketing. This is something that we should be doing a lot more of that we're not. This is a generation that really appreciates having a platform to interact with your brand and having a platform to talk about your brand. Don't talk at Gen Z. Don't tell them how good your product is. Influencers, they're still can be very powerful if you're very thoughtful about how you apply them. They're also very expensive. And they also don't necessarily feel super authentic either, because so many people know that influencers are being paid. So trying to find ways that you can interview Gen Z, share their tweets about your product, good or bad, or find ways that you can interact with them that doesn't feel like it's filtered through PR is huge. Sometimes this is hard to articulate. A good example would be if you're a restaurant and on a Thursday you have a sample menu. And if anybody who comes in and does a video review of them eating the food or having the drink on the menu gets no tax, no tip, or 20% off. You don't care what they're saying. You don't care if it's good or bad. You're just trying to get genuine content from people's peers in this generation. That's the kind of collaborative marketing that can be really effective, because it checks the box on authenticity. It provides this generation a platform to be honest, and it allows them to engage. And to the earlier point that Dustin made, everything should be a conversation here. This really needs to be a way to elevate that and be more collaborative in how you interact with this generation. Because they won't sit by and wait to be talked at. So I'm going to get off my pedestal for a second. Do we want to take a moment, guys, for questions, or do we want to plow through?
Yeah. Anybody got any hands, Peter?
What I suggest we do is know that we are going to have a moment for questions here. If anyone wants to come in, raise your hand. If you have a question, you can also throw it in chat. But Dustin, I think you should take it home here, and then we'll stop the questions.
All right, I'll take it home. That's no problem for me. So, the last part that we want to talk about, right, is we've gone through a lot of stuff. We've thrown a lot of numbers at you. So at the end of the day, you really want to think about, like, what are the things you really need to adjust, and what are some of the things that you can start applying, because that is what we want to essentially walk away with and be able to start doing. So I'm not going to explain how to make a marketing plan. We have webinars on that. You can always have a conversation with me. So I really wanted to point out a couple of key pieces of, like, your marketing plan where you really need to think about, like, well, we need to make these adjustments for Gen Z, and we need to make them soon, because these are the things that are going to start affecting you. So the first, of course, is content strategy and media mix. I've already sort of talked a little bit about what's ineffective and effective. And, it's important to know, like, what are the things you should be, focusing on, like, what we can tell from right now. Like, digital ads are still going to be one of the most important things out there, even with the security and privacy measures out there. Digital ads for search and display using Google Ads, media partners, still an important piece, especially since there is so much browsing behavior within this generation. Social media platforms, of course, is its number two. Instagram, still a very powerful piece right here. 41% of Gen Z prefer to follow brands they like on Instagram. So, this is something that you can start today, that you can, if you're not already strong there, start fortifying. TikTok, of course, is the next step, is really thinking about how to authentically jump onto that platform and potentially use it. You really have to think about your audience and what you would be building out of it. But 60% of TikTok is Gen Z. So that is something you need to consider in thinking about how you want to interact and engage. LinkedIn is still sort of a runner up as we kind of look and see, like, what is the future. As more and more join the workforce, there is still there's still a little bit of strength in LinkedIn to know that when you're thinking about recruitment, you're still looking at that generation. Getting off of college and getting onto LinkedIn is that next bridge, and that's something you definitely need to consider. And then, thinking about a couple of different things around, like Pinterest, Reddit, depending on very specific behaviors, and really talk to you, really find a way to connect with your particular audience, so you're not broad brushing too far, and really thinking about how you're addressing them on those platforms. And then, of course, we have to think about streaming. YouTube is still the #1 video for this generation. It's not going anywhere. It's still a very powerful tool. Thinking about incorporating that. Spotify, of course, is still very strong as well. And your OTT options. A lot of media is being consumed mobilely, and all of that is really through applications like Hulu, Peacock, Paramount. Everybody's got their mix of apps on there that have advertising platforms on it. So you need to start considering how to best utilize those as they continue to be big. And then, of course, physical media. So knowing that you're going to have, the digital, like, next step. QR codes is huge, with this generation still, and has made a huge comeback since COVID, and everybody has a smartphone. So making sure that your printed collateral, your posters, brochures, displays for recruitment, etc., all of these need to be able to have a next step to a digital platform, but they are still impactful to have a physical presence. And then, of course, we have to think about content strategy. Really be able to utilize organic social feeds, stories, reels, live events. Those are really important to make sure that you're utilizing the platform itself, depending on which platform you're using, to the best of its ability. Paid social is still going to be big on all of these platforms. And using group platforms for community communications. Like we talked a little bit about Discord previously. Depending on your group, whether it's something you need to make or something that you need to join, you need to consider where those conversations are happening, whether they are on Discord or Slack or Telegram, or eventually, we need to consider even the metaverse and VR chat rooms. Like, these are places where people are eventually going to be. And then of course, always remembering that your website is the number one item that people are still going to go to and, try to learn more about you as a brand. Planning and budgeting. We talked a little bit about this, but, like I said, not doing it by audience, really think about it by platform. From the result, from some of the questions that we had, I like to sort of throw it out there to keep it simple. We recommend not advertising by an age group, but by audience or age group particular, they are a piece of each platform that you need to consider in your mix. So you need to make sure that when you are advertising to Gen Z, that you're looking at it platform by platform. Like, how much are you spending on YouTube? How much are you spending on Instagram? If you're advertising on TikTok, how much are you advertising on TikTok? And keep those levers, because when you're monitoring, and adjusting your campaigns, you need to be able to have a flexible response. You need to be able to go from a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks and be able to change where you're spending your money on, what content's working, what's engaging these audiences, and know that, like, it's not signing a full deal for a 3 or 4 month campaign like you would in a traditional sense. It is hands-on monitoring these campaigns for as long as you're running them. So setting those intervals are really important. As an agency, we essentially make sure that we're meeting weekly or bi-weekly with our clients when we're having a very digital focused campaign. And make sure that when you're thinking about this, right, you have, digital ad exhaustion is still a thing. And, when you're getting to a certain degree, 3 to 4 weeks is about the limit that you're going to be able to have on certain types of content on certain platforms to be able to utilize. So you're looking to campaign for the next couple of months. You need to think about what kind of short form video you're going to have, 3 to 4 weeks in each interval, and really try to clasp down on what that kind of rhythm is going to be for whether you're working, in-house or you're working with an agency or et cetera, to make sure you're going to be able to have the content that's going to keep people engaged in this generation. But that's what we have for essentially those tweaks. So I know we have a couple of questions here and there. Peter, is there anything in the chat that I missed?
Yeah, no, that was great, Nick and Dustin. Yeah, I've had a couple from the survey, a couple that are in chat, and some that have been messaged to me. One that came up, I'll throw this to you and Nick, is a question of, does Gen Z even want to receive emails at all? Do they want to see notification emails, reminder emails? Do they want to see marketing emails? What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I feel like I know the right answer to this. I'm so confident, in fact, that I would welcome anybody who feels that I'm wrong to, like, please let me know if I sound like an idiot, because I think that the answer here is really broadly no. I think the answer is broadly no. Most of the email marketing that you're sending out is probably not effective for this generation. It's not because email isn't an effective use. I think it's because of how we tend to use emails and what excuses we have to send stuff. I think a lot of marketing plans have a cadence. Okay, we need to do this type of email, 3 times a month, and we want to do these on off weeks. And then obviously you want to build up, a steady stream, usually lead to a big event. Like, that's kind of how we broadly think about email marketing. I've had a junk email account at Yahoo since I was 13 years old. Like, dial-up and my junk email account have been hand in hand forever. It's probably the single longest account I've ever had, is just where all my trash emails go. And that's every time I sign up for a discount, every time somebody wants me to put put in my private information, it all goes to this email that I almost never check, right? I think that's how probably a lot of us are. I think that's how almost all of Gen Z is. That's not to say that emails are useless. I would say that the only emails that are really relevant for this community are emails that that really have something to say instead of something to announce. So if you're going to send emails that you want Gen Z to engage in, it's because, again, you're creating a sense of community, or you feel like there's a natural community to it. I think email marketing for advocacy organizations are way more relevant out of the box as they work right now for Gen Z than email marketing is for products, far and away. I think, you know, when you take a look at a lot of retail organizations, there's a big emphasis on loyalty programs. I think that those probably have diminishing returns, 80% diminishing returns on Gen Z compared to other groups, because they're really only going to sign up for maybe 2 or 3 email lists. They're going to check them regularly. They're going to unsubscribe the minute this isn't valuable to them. The unsubscribe ratios, the numbers that you see for unsubscribing happening from Gen Z is something like 300% higher than millennials, which are astronomically higher than the boomer generation. I think partially because of kind of just an inability sometimes to find where the unsubscribe button is or to successfully unsubscribe. We've made unsubscribing really difficult. But yeah, I think if you're trying to target Gen Z and you're trying to make a sea change there, I think you ask yourself whether the content that you're putting in emails is building a conversation and speaking to a community and helping to give them a platform to be involved, to share something about themselves. And if it's not, I wouldn't put together that email. I wouldn't try to send those emails. I would divert that energy and that capital to other platforms. But feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think
Yeah,
that was,
as if from all the data that I could find, there is so very little on the effectiveness of email marketing. So that does track. And I did see one question in there about if the rumor is true about Gen Z spending less time online. There seems to be a delicate balance, and you know, we're pulling a lot of national averages, and I think like there's definitely more things to the local scenes than others, but like we're still seeing a massive amount of time online. It's not the same habits as millennials, and like there are some changes here and there, but like screens time is still very high. So like I think it's really difficult, like with the data that we have now, to really make an assumption. Like I think that there is a shared value of trying to do more things face to face, especially for a generation that just had to graduate on Zoom. Like there's definitely some value in face to face interactions. Some of the most important conversations I have, especially with you know Gen Z, or, you know, generally are face to face, and I see a lot more pushing in that direction. But you know, there's still a lot of time online because of essentially the media mix that they do absorb is almost all, you know, like it's the majority of it is so mobile that that time is still spent. It's just spent differently.
Yeah, I would say Gen Z spends less time online in the same way that I eat healthy and go to the gym. I say it aloud, and sometimes I do, but it's more aspirational than I think it is the reality behavior.
Yeah. So I think that's like, as we kind of look to the future, like what are we going, I think, you know, this is something we will continue to have conversations on, as it's still a growing generation and different challenges are going to come up, different things are going to happen to this generation. So like, you know, where are we at and what needs to be applied now? We know this much from, you know, 7 years of experiencing it now, and there's still some road ahead of us. So it's something that's going to continue to evolve. So like one thing that I think is important as marketers or as people who are trying to advertise to this generation, like have that level of patience. Remember that this is a learning curve. Know that you have to make adjustments with how things are changing, what kind of feedback you're getting. The moment you start having those conversations with your core audience and you are able to have that conversation with them, you can make the more precise changes to bring them in.
Yeah. And also this is 13 to 25. You know what I mean? These trends are going to change as this generation matures also. You know what I mean? And whether it's a return to a status quo and norm is hard to say, but there were proclamations about what, you know, the boomer generation was going to be. I think most of those were inaccurate over time. You know what I mean? As everybody gets older, they start to have to deal with all the same harsh realities that we all do. And I think the best thing that we can hope for is that as a result of a lot of the changes that we're talking about with kind of who Gen Z is and how they interact with the world and the expectations that they have, that when they do mature as a generation, that that the harsh realities they're dealing with are a little less harsh than they are for us now, right? So, you know, they're going to continue to evolve and change, and our marketing and approach will have to do the same.
Great.
Suggestion to consider mental health.
We had one last question. I think, Nick, you've touched on this a little bit, but I think it might be important just to get your opinion on it. Do you advise using TikTok or Snapchat for reaching these consumers as opposed to Instagram? Is there anything else you want to quickly say on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you feel super uncomfortable being on TikTok, then you probably shouldn't use TikTok. You know what I mean? Like like authenticity is really kind of above all here. It's authenticity and good content. And your content isn't going to be good unless it's coming from an authentic place and you understand what platform you're on. So I would say you don't want to be, I would say, take a look at TikTok, start if you're looking at how your brand can be part of it, start a ghost account, you know what I mean? To see what kind of content is coming in, start to follow people that might be in your industry, or like I've said before, communities that you want to reach out to, and get a sense about what kind of content they're putting out, what kind of content they're engaging with, and then decide if you believe that it's authentic to your company or your identity to actually engage honestly there. Because if it feels like you're wearing a mask, if it feels like you've kind of got that imposter syndrome, that's gonna bleed through in the content that you produce and how often you do it and how realistic it is. So yeah, I mean, if it doesn't feel like a party that you feel invited to or you feel at home at, from a brand perspective, I wouldn't jump in on it. I would look at some of the other platforms that we have, Instagram, physical media. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of engage with this audience, your own website, your own web platform. Just feels better.
And just as a note on advertising, right? Like, Instagram, uses the metaverse's advertising platform, still probably a better option when we're talking about just pure advertising if you're not feeling comfortable on TikTok. Snapchat is a declining social media. I don't necessarily recommend it unless you're looking at a very specific group. It's one of those ones that, I don't think it's going to go the way of Vine, but it's not increasing. So you have to think about, who's spending time where. We're not seeing improvements there. So it's not something that I would recommend.
Yeah, don't jump on a sinking ship, guys.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, great. Yeah. Dustin and Nick, this was fantastic. This was a lot of great information. Thank you so much for this. We have Dustin, he's our account executive. We have his contact there. If anyone wants to continue the conversation, feel free to email him or give him a phone call. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn so you can be informed about what's happening with us and other events. And enjoy the holiday, everyone, and take some time off next week.
Right.
And have a great holiday.
And no, we're not on TikTok yet. So we're there with you.
Happy 4th, everybody.
Happy 4th.
Have a great one.